This is the rather unpromising start to the story of my first hidden treasure. But it's just a factory, I hear you cry. Not just any factory, but the Crittall Metal Window Factory, which in the 1920s had a worldwide reputation, employing hundreds of people. The owner was a man called Francis Crittall, known by his workers as the Governor. And when he built his factory here in the Essex countryside, he decided that while he was at it, he'd build an entire village in which to house his workforce. In 1925, the area around here was beautiful open farmland. But 2 years later, anybody driving down the winding lanes between Braintree and Witham would have discovered 150 of the most modern houses in England. These houses helped to launch the architectural modern movement in Great Britain, and Silver End was one of the country's first garden villages. For the working man in the 1920s, these houses were quite simply paradise. They had an internal toilet, a bathroom with running hot and cold water, and limitless electricity. Silver End was utopia. This is one of only 3 detached houses to be built, designed for a senior manager at the Crittall factory. Now, not everybody liked the modern movement, and some of the families that moved into these brand new houses thought that Mr. Crittall was far too mean to put a traditional pitched roof on, and they'd never seen a flat roof before. Francis Crittall's aim in planning these houses was to sacrifice traditional design in pursuit of light and space, and he really succeeded. You get an insight into the personality of the man they called the Governor when you hear the story of the tin of honey, which I'll be telling you shortly. The Governor was a real philanthropist, which is why he had an entire male-voice choir working for him. They were unemployed miners from Pontypool in Wales, who were touring Essex to raise money. The Governor heard them, gave them a job immediately, and with a job came a house. And if you were any good with a ball, you were given a place in the village team, and a job and a house, because the Governor, quite simply, loved football. So here's the honey story. The Governor and his wife were on holiday in the West Indies, all right for some, but his work back here at Silver End was never far from his mind. He saw some bees making honey, so on his return, every single one of his workers received a £7 tin of honey. So there'd be a knock on the door, and there would be his chauffeur with the words, "With the Governor's compliments." Silver End was undoubtedly a success and was described in one newspaper of the time as the metal window kingdom of happiness. But by 1931, the Depression had led to redundancies at the factory. Plans to build a hospital and a swimming pool in the village were scrapped, and the long rundown of the Crittall Company here at Silver End began. Frank Crittall himself said, "Well, the great adventure is over, but in Silver End we have thrown a pebble in the pool of time, and I shall be dead and forgotten long before its last ripple gains the shore." It was indeed a great achievement, and it all came about because a factory boss believed that if people were housed properly, they'd make happier and better workers, which actually seems to make a lot of sense. Here's a rather more ancient architectural treasure. This lovely house lies just outside the town of Coggeshall in Essex.
What you see now dates from the Tudor period, but it's built around the remains of Coggeshall Abbey, which was founded in 1142.
Coggeshall started life as a Savignac house, an order founded in France. But they merged with the Cistercians, an order that embraced the vows of obedience, poverty, and chastity. Because they wore habits made out of the fleeces of their own sheep, they were known as the White Monks. This is all that remains of the medieval cloister. But what's really interesting about it is that it's built out of brickwork, some of the earliest medieval brickwork in the country. Now, up until this time, when people wanted to build brick buildings, they used second-hand Roman bricks that had been lying about since the Romans left these shores 1,000 years earlier. But about this time, the Roman bricks were running out. So Essex man, who saw a chance, yes, he existed in those days, decided to make new bricks. And Essex was the first place in the country where bricks were made. So the Cistercians decided to build their abbey out of brickwork. But they didn't want their competitors, if monks have competitors, to think that they were cheapskates. So they built it out of brickwork, and then they rendered it over and painted lines on it so it looked just like stone.
This building, with its original brick floor and beautiful lancet windows, may well have been the guest house. Cistercians were a very hospitable order, believing that all guests who arrived should be welcomed like Christ himself.
One of Coggeshall's most distinguished abbots was Abbot Ralph, who was here from 1207. During his time here, he kept a chronicle and recorded such events as the time when King John lost all his jewels in the Wash, and when Richard the Lionheart was captured on his way to the Crusades, and when monasteries throughout the country had to raise money for his enormous ransom. But one of the most mysterious stories he tells happened in this building. He tells the story of a group of strangers who arrived at Coggeshall during the time of one of Ralph's predecessors. They were a strange troop of men, and the monks believed them to be the legendary Knights Templar. They behaved with great humility and insisted on dining here with all the other visitors. But the abbot, knowing them to be gentlemen, wanted them to dine in splendour at his own table. And when he turned to look at them again, they'd vanished, and the man who kept the gate couldn't remember anybody arriving or leaving.
The last abbot of Coggeshall surrendered the house in 1538 during Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries. The abbey was largely demolished and began a new lease of life as a house.
Who was the first person to own the abbey after the dissolution of the monasteries in 1538?
Thomas Seymour, the brother of Jane Seymour, who was Henry VIII's favourite wife. She didn't live very long, maybe that was why.
Now, we all know that the infirmary is a very important part of any monastery. Is anything of that left now?
Yes. There's a column there.
I see there on the corner with the brickwork and the stone on the top.
Pre-1167, and it's got an archway on top, and one of the walls in the front of the house is mainly remains of the old infirmary wall.
It must need an awful lot of upkeep, looking at this place of this great age and distinction.
You'd be surprised. It's been here so long that one doesn't worry about it falling down. And provided you stop the water coming in at the bottom and you keep the water out of the top, you're all right.
Hundreds of years ago, Coggeshall Abbey would have been bustling with activity. Now it's a quiet country house. But if you listen carefully, I swear you can hear those medieval brickies wondering whether it's time for their next tea break. This is the village of Great Warley in Essex, home to one of the most beautiful of my hidden treasures. At the end of the 19th century, the village rector built a lovely wooden church in the grounds of his home. Worshippers were thrilled. All went well until the rector passed away, and the villagers discovered, rather to their surprise, that his will stipulated that the church be dismantled and moved to Yorkshire.
As you can well imagine, there was some consternation amongst the villagers of Great Warley. Enter a city stockbroker, Evelyn Heseltine.
He'd moved here with his wife in 1876. The family home is now a hotel. He wasn't short of a bob or two, and at the cost of £5,000, he built the village a brand new church, the Church of St Mary the Virgin.
It was completed in 1904, which makes it precisely 100 years old. It was designed in what was then a very popular style of architecture. The simplicity on the outside belies what we're going to discover on the inside, but there are one or two clues.
These beautiful carvings on the lich gate, the delicate golden dove at the top of the spire, and the fact that even the rainwater hoppers are delightfully decorated.
This is one of only 3 churches in the country designed in this style, and it's the best preserved. The architectural historian Nicholas Pevsner describes the interior as an orgy of Art Nouveau.
At the turn of the 20th century, Art Nouveau, with its sinuous, flowing lines and rich colours, was popular throughout Europe and America. In this country, it had its roots in the arts and crafts movement led by William Morris, focusing on images from nature, such as flowers and trees.
The idea of building a country church in what would have been an ultra-modern style was viewed with some suspicion by people in this rural area, but it's what the patron Evelyn Heseltine wanted. So he engaged 2 of the leading lights in the English Art Nouveau movement, the architect Charles Harrison Townsend and the decorative artist William Reynolds Stevens. Before being installed in the church in 1903, this so-called rood screen between the nave and chancel was displayed at the Royal Academy of Arts. It caused an absolute sensation. These delicate trunks grow mysteriously out of the small green marble wall. And then the branches of the trees support silver angels who hold banners of the fruits of the Spirit: peace, joy, faithfulness.
And using a little poetic license, rich red pomegranates in glowing enamel, and the shape of the heart seen all around the church, and representing, of course, the greatest fruit of the Spirit, love. The domed ceiling over the altar is decorated with vines and covered with squares of shimmering aluminium, an extremely exotic material to be used at the time, as aluminium had only been in commercial production since 1896, less than 10 years. The cost, the same as silver. But the soot from countless candles began to leave its mark, and the ceiling gradually lost its gleam.
This started to irritate one of the congregation, Harold Lansdell, who in 1980 decided to use his skills as a gilder to improve things, and he restored it to all its magnificence. But just to remind us what it looked like, he left one tiny piece.
Evelyn Heseltine was a successful young city gent and no stranger to such mod cons as electricity.
In the days of candlelight, they were called chandeliers. When gas was used for lighting, they were gasoliers. And when electricity came along, they were called electroliers. Now, Reynolds Stevens started life training as an engineer, so he knew how to work in metal. In this case, he's used galvanised iron to suggest a flower bud.
Evelyn built the church in memory of his brother, who had died tragically young. But he didn't want it to be a gloomy mausoleum. He wanted it to have exuberance and vitality.
This veritable jewel of a little church has survived bombing, vandalism and theft. And I, for one, would like to congratulate it on its first centenary and wish it well for hundreds of years to come.
Our final architectural treasure is quite a contrast, but it's still in Essex, and just a few miles away, it couldn't be further in terms of style and scale.
This is England's newest cathedral, and it's in the heart of Brentwood.
Brentwood Cathedral is designed by Essex-based architect Quinlan Terry, a leading exponent of the classical style of architecture. It's inspired by the Italian Renaissance and the English Baroque of Christopher Wren, and work began in 1989. The cathedral was completed and dedicated just 2 years later.
One of the most striking features of the outside of the building is the domed cupola on top of the roof. It was made in Cambridge, and the dome alone weighs 2.5 tons, so it took an awful lot of effort to get it up there. We're talking helicopters and the largest mobile crane in the country.
Inside, the light floods in through Wren-style windows, and both the white walls and the Portland stone floor add to the sense of calmness and space. From the 4th century, Christians met and worshipped in large open buildings called basilicas, and the cathedral continues that tradition. The altar occupies a central position with the congregation gathered around.
The font is a very important item in any Christian church, and this one is octagonal. It has 8 sides, because 8 is a very important number for Christians. In the early church, there was the belief that the week had 8 days, beginning and ending on Sundays. God created the earth in 7 days, but the 8th day was the day that Jesus Christ rose from the dead.
The ambo, or pulpit, has also been designed with 8 sides. The steps around the altar are octagonal. The altar rests on 8 Tuscan columns, and the lantern we saw from the outside, which rises directly above the altar, has also, of course, got 8 sides.
Bishop, when you commissioned your architect, Quinlan Terry, what did you ask him to do for you?
Well, I wanted a new cathedral in the classical style, and then we debated whether we would incorporate one aisle of what was the Victorian Gothic. And he said, yes, I think that's a very good idea, because he said you don't go into any small parish church, let alone cathedral, without something from the past. So he felt that the atmosphere of that would spill over into the new. And I think it was Ninian Comper, the great church architect, who called it beauty by inclusion.
Now, the tabernacle, where the sacrament is reserved, I understand that you found that somewhere.
I did. I was actually in Rome on holiday and looking for old candlesticks, and went into this particular shop, which had this stunning tabernacle. and classical and beautiful colours, and so I didn't feel I could come away without it, really.
Above the classical arches are the Stations of the Cross, which traditionally depict events on Christ's journey to Calvary. The emphasis here is on faces, and station number 4 shows Christ meeting his mother Mary. They were designed by Raphael Maclouf, who also sculpted the Queen's head for our coins.
And it's here, in the beautiful surroundings of Brentwood Cathedral, that my search for architectural treasures, both ancient and modern, comes to an end.